Welcome to Stories from Reddit, where truth is stranger than fiction. If you're ready for a story that will make your blood boil and your heart race, then you've come to the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now, because today's story is about a 68-year-old woman named Eleanor Vance who discovered that sometimes the deadliest enemies are the ones sleeping under your own roof. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single twist in this tale of family betrayal, attempted murder, and the most devastating revenge you'll ever hear. My name is Eleanor Vance, and at 68 years old, I thought I understood the true price of wealth. When you inherit an oil fortune worth $80 million from your grandfather's empire, you learn that money doesn't just talk, it screams, it lies, and sometimes it kills. But I never imagined that the greatest threat to my life would come wearing my son's face and calling me mom. The Vance estate sprawled across 500 acres of prime North Carolina land where oil derricks pumped liquid gold from beneath the earth my grandfather had fought and bled to claim. The mansion itself was a testament to 3 generations of prosperity. 14 rooms of hand-carved mahogany, crystal chandeliers, and Persian rugs that cost more than most people's houses. It was beautiful, imposing, and utterly lonely since my husband Robert died 5 years ago, leaving me to manage an empire I'd never wanted. That Tuesday morning in October started like any other. I was in my study reviewing quarterly reports from our various oil fields when I heard the familiar rumble of Derek's BMW coming up the circular drive. My 35-year-old son rarely visited without an agenda. And as I watched him through the bay windows, I could see the tension in his shoulders, even from a distance. Derek had always been handsome in that privileged, prep school way that opened doors and closed minds, but lately, something had changed. The easy confidence of his youth had been replaced by a desperate hunger that made me uncomfortable. It was the look of a man who tasted failure and found it bitter. "Mom," he said, bursting into my study without knocking, his expensive suit wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. "We need to talk." I set down my reading glasses and studied my son's face. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and there was a tremor in his hands that he was trying to hide. "Of course, sweetheart. Sit down. You look terrible. Thanks for the pep talk," Derek muttered, collapsing into the leather chair across from my mahogany desk. "Look, I'm going to cut straight to the chase. I need money. A lot of money." Here we go again, I thought. Derek's business ventures had a history of requiring my financial intervention. His last startup, some sort of app for rating restaurants, had cost me $300,000 before folding spectacularly. Before that, it was a clothing line that never made it past the design phase. Each failure was followed by elaborate explanations about market timing and investor politics, but the result was always the same. My bank account got lighter while Derek's promises got emptier. "How much?" I asked, though I suspected I didn't want to know the answer. $100,000. The number hung in the air between us like smoke from a gunshot. It was more than he'd ever asked for before, and the way he said it, like he was ordering coffee, set off every alarm bell in my head. "That's a substantial amount, Derek. What's this venture?" "It's a tech startup, a revolutionary online marketing platform that's going to change everything." His words came out in a practiced rush, like he'd rehearsed this pitch in the mirror. "My partner has connections with Fortune 500 companies, and we're projecting 7-figure profits in the first year alone." I'd heard variations of this song before, and it never ended well. "Who's your partner?" Derek's eyes flickered away from mine. "You don't know him. He's from California. Tech background. Proven track record." "What's his name, Mom? Why does it matter? The opportunity is what's important here," the evasion was telling. In 30 years of cross-examining witnesses as a prosecutor before I retired, I'd learned to recognize the sound of lies being born. Derek was hiding something, and whatever it was, it required $100. Zero to fix. "Derek, we've had this conversation before, multiple times. I've supported your business dreams generously, and none of them have succeeded. Perhaps it's time you tried building something with your own resources." The transformation was immediate and frightening. Derek's face darkened, and his hands clenched into fists on his lap. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of his father, my ex-husband, who tried to manipulate me out of my inheritance before I divorced him 15 years ago. My own resources. Derek's voice rose to a near shout. What resources? Mom, I'm drowning here. Do you have any idea what it's like to live in the shadow of all this? He gestured wildly at the opulent study around us. Everyone expects me to be successful because I'm a Vance, but how can I compete when you control everything? I've given you every advantage. Advantages? Derek laughed bitterly. You've given me just enough to fail spectacularly. Just enough to make me look like a spoiled rich kid who can't make it on his own, but never enough to actually succeed. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. I had been careful about how much money I gave Derek, perhaps too careful, but I'd seen too many wealthy families destroyed by children who never learned the value of work. Derek, calm down. Let's discuss this rationally. There's nothing to discuss. I need that money. And I need it now. This isn't a request, Mom. A necessity. Give me the money. You'll die soon anyway. I felt my blood chill. My son wanted me dead. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. This wasn't the petulant demand of a spoiled child. This was something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously close to a threat. The answer is no. Derek. I won't be investing in another one of your ventures. He stood up so abruptly that his chair rocked backward. Fine, but don't come crying to me when you're older and alone because you chose money over family. The words hit like a slap. But it was the cold calculation in his eyes that really terrified me. This wasn't anger anymore. This was something much worse. Derek, is there something you're not telling me? Are you in some kind of trouble? For just a moment, his mask slipped completely. I saw fear there, and desperation, and something that looked like genuine panic. But then the cold expression returned, and he headed for the door. Forget it, he said without turning around. I'll figure it out myself, as Derek's BMW roared down the driveway. Kicking up gravel and dust, I sat alone in my study, feeling like I had just dodged a bullet I didn't understand. Something was very wrong with my son, and whatever it was, it required $100,000 to solve. I picked up the phone to call my private investigator, then set it down again. Derek was my son, my flesh and blood. Whatever trouble he was in, we could work through it together. That decision would nearly cost me my life. 2 days later, Derek returned with his wife Chelsea, and immediately, I knew this wasn't a social visit. While Derek's previous approach had been desperate and direct, this felt calculated and strategic. They arrived at exactly 10 o'clock a.m., not early enough to seem overeager, not late enough to appear disrespectful. The timing felt deliberate. I watched from my kitchen window as they got out of Derek's car. Even from a distance, Chelsea commanded attention. She was beautiful in that sharp, expensive way that required considerable maintenance, platinum blonde hair that moved like silk, designer clothes that fit her model-thin frame perfectly, and an aura of confidence that came from knowing she was the most attractive person in any room. Derek and Chelsea had been married for 3 years, but I never felt truly comfortable around my daughter-in-law. There was something theatrical about her interactions with me, like she was playing a role rather than being herself. She always said exactly what people wanted to hear, but her eyes remained calculating and cold. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind us dropping by, Chelsea said as she glided into my kitchen, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee in delicate china mugs. She moved with the kind of practiced grace that made every gesture look like a performance. I brought you something special. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people earned in a month, and her makeup was flawless despite the early hour. Everything about her appearance suggested someone who'd spent considerable time preparing for this visit. I made this just for you, Chelsea continued, extending one of the cups toward me with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. It's a special blend I picked up from that boutique coffee shop downtown, Ethiopian beans with Madagascar vanilla. I thought you might enjoy trying something new. The coffee smelled wrong. Not bad, exactly, but sharp and bitter, with an underlying chemical odor that reminded me of almonds mixed with something medicinal. After 30 years of prosecuting criminals, you develop an instinct for danger. Every nerve in my body was screaming that something was off, but I kept my expression neutral. How thoughtful of you, dear, I said, accepting the cup while studying Chelsea's face. She was watching me with an intensity that felt predatory, like a cat watching a mouse approach a trap. Derek lingered by the kitchen doorway, and I noticed he wouldn't meet my eyes. His usual nervous energy had been replaced by a strange stillness that made him look like he was holding his breath. When I glanced at him, he quickly looked away, focusing on his phone with obvious discomfort. "Derek tells me you two had a little disagreement the other day," Chelsea said, settling gracefully into the chair across from me with her own cup, "about business opportunities and family support." The way she said family support made it sound like an obligation rather than a choice. I noticed she hadn't taken a sip of her coffee yet, despite encouraging me to drink mine. "We had a discussion about financial boundaries," I said carefully. "Derek has some wonderful entrepreneurial energy, but I think it's important for him to develop his own resources." "Of course," Chelsea agreed, her smile never wavering. "Independence is so important, though it can be challenging when family members have such different perspectives on success." When Chelsea turned slightly to glance at Derek, I made a split-second decision that would save my life. Using the moment when her attention was diverted, I quickly switched our cups. They were identical white china mugs, and the exchange took less than 2 seconds. "Derek's told me so much about his latest venture," I said, testing to see how much Chelsea knew about her husband's mysterious business partner. "It sounds very promising." Something flickered in Chelsea's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance. "Yes, he's very excited about the potential. And his partner," Derek mentioned someone from California with tech experience. "MMMHMM," Chelsea hummed noncommittally, raising her cup, which was now my original one, to her lips. Innovation is so important in today's market. We chatted about meaningless things while I pretended to sip my coffee and watched Chelsea take her first real drink. Her face twisted slightly, like she tasted something unpleasant, and I saw her eyes widen with what looked like confusion, but she said nothing about the flavor, which was interesting. "This is delicious," I lied, setting my cup down after another fake sip. "You'll have to tell me where you found this blend." "The shop on Elm Street," Chelsea said absently. And I could see her mind working, trying to process something that didn't make sense to her. Derek was checking his watch with increasing frequency, and there was a tension in the room that felt like a storm building on the horizon. Whatever they'd come here to accomplish wasn't going according to plan. 20 minutes later, Chelsea started coughing. It began as a small, polite clearing of her throat, but quickly escalated into deep, violent spasms that shook her entire body. Her face flushed red, then began taking on a grayish pallor that made her look genuinely ill. "Something's wrong," she gasped, gripping the edge of the table as the coughing grew worse. Her voice was becoming hoarse and strained. I can't breathe properly." Derek rushed over from his position by the door, his concern appearing genuine, or at least well-acted. "Chelsea, what's happening? Are you having an allergic reaction?" "Hospital," she wheezed, her breathing becoming increasingly labored. "Need to go to the hospital now." As we rushed to prepare for the emergency room, Chelsea leaning heavily on Derek while making appropriately distressed noises, one thought kept repeating in my mind: that coffee had been meant for me, which meant my loving daughter-in-law had just poisoned herself with her own murder weapon. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me smile. The ride to Mercy General Hospital felt like a scene from a medical drama, complete with Chelsea's increasingly theatrical symptoms and Derek's perfectly calibrated concern. I sat in the back seat watching this performance unfold and marveled at the precision of their act. Chelsea's breathing had become labored and raspy. Her skin was flushed and blotchy, and she was clutching her throat like she was fighting for every breath. If I hadn't known better, I would have been genuinely worried about her condition, but knowing what I knew about the coffee's intended target, I found myself studying her symptoms with clinical detachment. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Derek asked for the third time in 10 minutes, his voice pitched perfectly between concern and panic. "Just hold on, we're almost there." "Burns," Chelsea managed to gasp between coughing fits. "Throat burning, cyanide poisoning." I realized the and smell, the respiratory distress, the burning sensation. Someone had done their homework. Cyanide was fast-acting, difficult to detect without specific tests, and would cause exactly the symptoms Chelsea was experiencing. If she'd given me the full dose intended for my body weight, I would likely be dead by now. The emergency room at Mercy General was controlled chaos, with the usual mix of genuine emergencies and hypochondriacs that made triage such an art form. But Chelsea's condition was dramatic enough to get immediate attention. "We need help," Derek called out as we entered, supporting his wife, who was now making choking sounds that would have been alarming if they weren't so perfectly timed. "My wife can't breathe." The medical team responded with impressive efficiency. Within minutes, Chelsea was on a gurney, hooked up to monitors, and surrounded by nurses taking vitals and asking rapid-fire questions. "When did the symptoms start?" Dr. Amanda Rodriguez asked, clipboard in hand and stethoscope around her neck. "About 30 minutes ago," Derek answered, playing the role of concerned husband to perfection. "She was fine this morning, then suddenly started coughing and having trouble breathing. Any known allergies, medications, recent changes in diet or environment?" "Nothing," Derek said. "She's always been perfectly healthy." I watched this exchange with growing fascination. Derek was answering all the questions smoothly, never hesitating, never appearing uncertain. Either he was remarkably calm under pressure, or he'd prepared for exactly this scenario. "Mrs. Vance," Dr. Rodriguez addressed Chelsea directly, "can you tell me what you were doing just before the symptoms started?" "Coffee," Chelsea whispered, her voice barely audible. "Having coffee with her." Her eyes found mine across the small examination area. The way she said her carried an unmistakable note of accusation, even in her supposedly weakened state. Chelsea was already laying the groundwork for what was to come. Dr. Rodriguez followed Chelsea's gaze to me. "Are you family?" "I'm her mother-in-law," I said. "We were having morning coffee when she became ill." "Did you both drink the same coffee?" "Similar," I said carefully. "Chelsea prepared it. 2 cups from the same pot." Dr. Rodriguez made notes on her clipboard, and I could see the wheels turning in her medical mind. Food poisoning was always a possibility when multiple people consumed the same substance, but only one person getting sick suggested either an allergic reaction or something more sinister. "We're going to run some blood tests," Dr. Rodriguez announced. "In the meantime, let's get you on oxygen and see if we can make you more comfortable." As the medical team worked on Chelsea, Derek turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mom, I'm going to run home and get some of her things. Pajamas, medications. You know how hospitals are." "Of course, sweetheart," I said, patting his arm. "Take your time." It was interesting how quickly Derek was leaving, especially when his wife was potentially fighting for her life. Either he was remarkably trusting of the medical staff or he had somewhere else he needed to be urgently. I settled into the uncomfortable plastic chair in the waiting area, surrounded by the familiar sounds of medical emergencies and human suffering. The magazines were outdated, the coffee was terrible, and the fluorescent lighting made everyone look slightly dead. It was the perfect setting for contemplating attempted murder. 3 hours later, Derek returned with an overnight bag, looking appropriately exhausted and worried. His timing was impeccable. He walked through the door just as Dr. Rodriguez emerged from the treatment area with news. "We found traces of cyanide in her bloodstream," Dr. Rodriguez announced with clinical precision. "This appears to be deliberate poisoning. I'm required by law to contact the authorities." Cyanide. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Derek's face went pale, and he grabbed my arm as if seeking support. "Poisoning," he repeated, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine shock. "But how? Who would do something like that?" Before Dr. Rodriguez could answer, Chelsea's voice rang out from behind the curtain, weak but remarkably clear for someone who'd been at death's door. "She did it," Chelsea said, her finger pointing directly at me when the curtain was pulled back. "Eleanor poisoned my coffee. She tried to kill me." The accusation hit the room like a bomb. Dr. Rodriguez stared at me with a mixture of shock and suspicion while Derek looked like he'd been slapped. "That's impossible," Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mom would never. She made the coffee herself," Chelsea continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. "She handed it to me personally. She watched me drink it. Well, That was gratitude for you. I'd inadvertently saved her life by switching cups, and she was repaying the favor by trying to frame me for attempted murder. The irony was delicious, even if the consequences were likely to be serious. Detective Eleanor Rodriguez arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes of Dr. Rodriguez's call, which suggested that attempted murder cases received priority attention in our quiet North Carolina town. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of sharp eyes that miss nothing and the patient demeanor of someone who'd heard every lie in the book. Mrs. Vance, Detective Rodriguez said, introducing herself with a firm handshake, I understand there's been an incident involving poisoning. I'd like to speak with you privately if that's all right. We moved to a small consultation room down the hall from where Chelsea was still receiving treatment. The room was sterile and windowless, designed for delivering bad news and uncomfortable conversations. I want to be clear from the start. Detective Rodriguez began, opening her notebook. You're not under arrest, and you're free to leave at any time, but I need to understand what happened here today. I told her exactly what had occurred, the strange smell in the coffee. My instinct to switch the cups, Chelsea drinking what was originally meant for me. I kept my explanation factual and straightforward, the way I taught witnesses to testify during my years as a prosecutor. Mrs. Vance, Detective Rodriguez said when I finished, if you suspected the coffee was dangerous, why didn't you simply refuse to drink it or warn Mrs. Vance? It was the logical question, and one I'd been preparing to answer since the moment Chelsea started coughing. I wasn't completely certain something was wrong, I said. It was more of an instinct than a concrete suspicion. I thought switching the cups would be a way to test my concerns without creating unnecessary drama if I was wrong. And when Mrs. Vance became ill, I realized my instinct had been correct. Someone had tried to poison me, and Chelsea had accidentally become the victim. Instead, Detective Rodriguez made careful notes, her expression revealing nothing about whether he believed my story. Who else knew you were having coffee this morning? Only Derek and Chelsea. It was a spur-of-the-moment visit. Had you been experiencing any threats lately? Anyone who might want to harm you? I thought about Derek's desperate request for money and his angry departure 2 days earlier, but something held me back from mentioning it. Whatever my son was involved in, I wanted to understand it fully before involving the police. Nothing specific, I said. When you have significant wealth, you're always aware that some people might see you as a target. When Detective Rodriguez interviewed Derek, I could hear the conversation through the thin walls of the consultation room. My son's responses sent chills down my spine. My mother's been acting strange lately, Derek said, his voice carrying clearly through the wall. I mean, I don't think she'd actually hurt anyone, but she's been more paranoid than usual, suspicious of everyone. And what way? Just little things. Asking a lot of questions about Chelsea's background, making comments about gold diggers and people who marry for money. I thought it was just normal mother-in-law stuff, but now, the doubt in Derek's voice was unmistakable. My own son was throwing me under the bus, creating reasonable doubt about my mental state and suggesting I might be capable of poisoning his wife. Has she ever expressed any direct animosity toward your wife? She's never said anything outright hostile, but there's been tension. Mom can be very controlling when it comes to family money. She doesn't like anyone she thinks might be after her fortune. Each word was a carefully placed knife in my back. Derek was painting a picture of a paranoid, controlling old woman who might poison her daughter-in-law out of jealousy and suspicion. It was brilliant character assassination, and it was coming from my own child. When Detective Rodriguez returned to question me further, her entire demeanor had changed. The polite professional courtesy had been replaced by a barely concealed suspicion. Mrs. Vance, I need to ask you some direct questions. Have you been concerned about your daughter-in-law's intentions regarding your family's wealth? The question was clearly based on what Derek had told her. I chose my words carefully. I think it's natural for any parent to be protective of their family's assets, but I've never had any specific reason to distrust Chelsea. Your son mentioned that you've been acting more suspicious lately. Is there any truth to that? I don't believe I've been acting any differently than usual. Derek may be interpreting normal caution as suspicion. Detective Rodriguez made more notes, and I could see her building a case in her mind. Wealthy older woman, suspicious of young daughter-in-law, history of controlling behavior around money, opportunity, and means to commit poisoning. Mrs. Vance, I'm going to need to examine your home as part of this investigation. Do I have your permission to conduct a search? I knew I could refuse and demand a warrant, but that would only make me look more guilty. Of course, I have nothing to hide. We'll also need to examine any computers, phones, or other devices that might contain relevant information. Whatever you need, detective. As we prepared to leave the hospital, I caught one last glimpse of Chelsea through the gap in her room's curtain. She was sitting up in bed, no longer appearing to struggle for breath, engaged in quiet conversation with a nurse. When she saw me looking, she offered a small, satisfied smile that made my blood run cold. That smile told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The search of my home was thorough, professional, and utterly devastating. Detective Rodriguez arrived with a full forensics team and a warrant that gave them permission to examine every inch of my property. I watched from my living room as strangers in latex gloves went through my most personal possessions, looking for evidence that I was a would-be murderer. We appreciate your cooperation, Mrs. Vance, Detective Rodriguez said as her team spread throughout the house. This should only take a few hours. I sat in my study, the same room where Derek had demanded money just 2 days earlier, and tried to process how quickly my life had spiraled out of control 72 hours ago. I'd been a wealthy widow living quietly on her family's estate. Now, I was the prime suspect in an attempted murder case. The forensics team worked with methodical precision, photographing everything, dusting for fingerprints, and collecting samples from surfaces throughout the house. They paid particular attention to the kitchen, where Chelsea claimed to have prepared the poison coffee. "Ma'am," one of the technicians called from the kitchen, "can you show us where the coffee supplies are kept?" I led them to the pantry where my housekeeper kept various coffee beans, filters, and accessories. Everything looked normal to me, but the technicians treated each item like potential evidence, carefully bagging and labeling anything that might have come into contact with poison. "What about cleaning supplies?" Detective Rodriguez asked. "Anything that might contain chemical compounds." I showed them to the utility room where we kept the usual household chemicals, bleach, ammonia, drain cleaners, and various other toxic substances that could be found in any home. Again, they photographed and sampled everything. 2 hours into the search, I heard one of the technicians call out from the guest bathroom upstairs, "Detective Rodriguez, you need to see this." The excitement in his voice made my stomach clench. I followed Detective Rodriguez upstairs, dreading what they might have found. In the guest bathroom, a room I rarely used and hadn't even entered in weeks, they discovered a small glass vial hidden behind the medicine cabinet. The vial contained traces of a clear liquid, and beside it was a handwritten list that included Chelsea's name along with what appeared to be dosage calculations. "Mrs. Vance," Detective Rodriguez said, holding up an evidence bag containing the vial and list, "can you explain these items?" I stared at the evidence, feeling the world tilt around me. The handwriting on the list looked remarkably similar to mine, though I had no memory of writing anything like it. The vial was completely unfamiliar. "I've never seen either of those items before," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "This is your handwriting, isn't it?" Detective Rodriguez pressed, showing me the list more closely. Looking at it carefully, I had to admit that it did look like my handwriting. The formation of the letters, the particular way I crossed my T's and dotted my I's. Whoever had written this had either studied my writing extensively or— "Detective," I said, cutting off her next question, "I want to bring up something important. While we were at the hospital this morning, Derek left for several hours to get Chelsea's belongings from their house. He would have had access to my home during that time. Are you suggesting your son planted this evidence?" The words sounded insane even as I said them, but I couldn't ignore the obvious timeline. "I'm saying that someone with access to my house and knowledge of my handwriting could have placed these items here while we were at the hospital." Detective Rodriguez studied me carefully. "Mrs. Vance, that's a very serious accusation to make. against your own son. It's not an accusation. It's an observation about opportunity and access. But even as I said it, I could see the doubt in Detective Rodriguez's eyes. The grieving mother caught red-handed with evidence of attempted murder, trying to blame her innocent son. It was exactly the kind of desperate deflection that guilty people attempted when cornered. "We'll be taking these items for analysis," Detective Rodriguez said, sealing the evidence bags along with samples of my handwriting for comparison. "Of course, Mrs. Vance, I have to ask, do you own any firearms?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes, I have a pistol in my bedroom safe." "Why, we'll need to examine that as well." I led them to my bedroom and opened the safe, revealing a .38 caliber revolver that Robert had insisted I keep for protection. The gun was exactly where I'd left it, and I couldn't imagine how it related to a poisoning case. "Has this weapon been fired recently?" Detective Rodriguez asked. "Not in over a year. I occasionally take it to the shooting range for practice, but I haven't done that in months." They bagged the gun anyway, along with the box of ammunition from the safe. I was beginning to understand that in a criminal investigation, everything was potentially relevant until proven otherwise. As the search team finished their work, Detective Rodriguez pulled me aside for a final conversation. "Mrs. Vance, based on what we found today, I need to inform you that you're now considered a person of interest in this case. I strongly recommend that you contact an attorney. Am I under arrest?" "Not at this time. But I advise you not to leave town without notifying my office." After the police left, I walked through my home, seeing it with new eyes. Rooms that had been photographed and searched, surfaces that had been dusted for fingerprints, possessions that had been examined for evidence of criminal intent. My sanctuary had been violated, and I felt like a stranger in my own house. But more than that, I felt the weight of betrayal settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Someone had planned this carefully, planting evidence that would point directly to me while creating a perfect cover story. And the only person who'd had the opportunity, access, and knowledge to do it was my own son. That night, I sat in my study with a glass of wine, staring at the oil derricks visible through my window. The mechanical pumps continued their steady rhythm, extracting wealth from the earth, just as they had for 3 generations. But for the first time since inheriting this empire, I wondered if it was worth. If you're ready for more stories that will leave you speechless, make sure to give this video a like. Leave a comment with your thoughts on what Eleanor should do next. Subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next story.